It's been called the eighth wonder of the world. Car and Driver magazine called it one of the 10 things to see before you die. It's been used as a set for a Tom Cruise movie. It was the inspiration for the opening scene for Disney Pixar's animated feature film Cars, and one of its oversized trophies was used in the feature film Talladega Nights. Driving here has been likened to flying fighter jets in a gymnasium and racing in a salad bowl. It's the second largest sports arena in the United States and the 8th largest on the planet. And even at that size, the tickets are some of the hardest to get for any sporting event. Now you would think that a facility this big would be in New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles, but you would be wrong. It's the Bristol Motor Speedway, located in Bristol, Tennessee, a city of about 25,000 people. It has brought growth and notoriety to the region. Like most great American icons, it had humble beginnings. Larry Carrier and Carl Moore were the men with the vision that brought the track to Bristol.
I guess that was really Larry's idea, probably. I was in Knoxville at a Tennessee football game. He calls me up and says, "Carl, I'm over in Charlotte. You got to come over here." I says, "What's going on?" So they're having a race over here, and you got about 50,000 people paying $20 a ticket. Your cars go around in a circle. You got to come see this. So I flew from Knoxville to Charlotte, and sure enough, Larry was there, and I saw the race and got kind of enthused about it. We decided to come back and maybe I'll win in Bristol if we could.
Both men realized that building another racetrack in a small town wasn't the answer. The key was to get NASCAR involved.
Oh yeah, we wouldn't come without NASCAR. We went down to see Bill France, who was president of NASCAR, and he kind of liked us and sent us out to dinner with his right-hand guy named Pat Purcell. And Pat liked us a lot. Pat came up to all of our races as long as he lived. He's always up here. But they finally said, "Well, if you guys are crazy to build a racetrack in the East Tennessee Hills, what dates do you want?" Picked their own dates out. Didn't cost a penny. Today it would be $100 million each one if you could get them. Wow. Just the way it works.
But like most great ideas, it just wasn't as easy as they thought it was going to be.
Well, Larry's dad was a real estate fellow. He specialized in farms. And he found a farm in Piney Flats that looked like it might work pretty well. So we took an option on it. Then we had a kind of a community meeting to tell people what we were going to do. I heard some rumbling, maybe they won't racetracks around here. You know, they might bring in bad elements, might bring in some alcohol and some gambling, some loose women. We don't want that around Piney Flats.
David Mcgee is an announcer for the track and has written 2 books about its history.
And Carl and Larry finally said, well, let's just go over there and talk to the people. So they had a little community meeting, and there were a couple of ministers over there who opposed the track. And as Carl tells it, they were basically worshiped and welcomed by a lot of the folks, but not so much by some of them. And the basic decision was, well, if they don't want us, let's just go someplace else.
We said, if you don't want us, we're not going to come. So it was only, I think, basically 2 people who kind of led the charge against us. So we said, bye-bye, we'll come back. So Larry's dad got on his horse, came up here and found another piece of property, which is a dairy farm we're sitting on right now. So we bought this dairy farm and also included the drag strip property. All went together.
So they basically walked away from Piney Flats, and that is a residential subdivision now, kind of in behind where the White's grocery store used to be, that large retail plaza right there. That's the area that they were looking at. And it was going to allow them, because they wanted to build a track that was bigger than a half mile. They wanted to build something larger, maybe 3/4 of a mile to a mile. And that was going to give them the opportunity to do that, but that just didn't work out.
But big ideas are free. Buying the land and building the racetrack was not.
We couldn't get any money. We didn't have any money. I went to all the bankers. That's my job, try to find the money. I couldn't even get a seat at the table to talk about it. Back to Bill France. Bill, we got the land, but we got to have the money to buy the land and build the track. He said, well, go see a guy up at Burlow Vending Company. They do a lot of business in dog tracks and all kind of tracks all over the country. They might lend me some money. He mentioned, we flew up to New Jersey. I always thought it was part of the mafia. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But you know, we had to smoke green cigars, smoke a little liquor. We didn't even want to drink at that time. And he said, "I don't need the money. How much you need?" We need $600,000. He said, "Well, interest rate's 5%. I said, "That's correct." He said, "I charge 10%. I want your concession rights for 15 years. We didn't have a choice. We signed up. We got $600,000 to buy the land and build the racetrack.
So, in 1960, construction began. The track complex covered 100 acres and would provide parking for more than 12,000 cars. The track itself was a perfect half mile, measuring 60 feet wide on the straightaways, 75 feet wide on the turns, which were banked at 22 degrees. There were concrete bleachers on both sides of the track, which left room for about 18,000 paying race fans.
Well, the first race was pretty much a sellout. We were surprised, didn't know what was going to happen. Ticket sales weren't good in advance. People waited until Sunday morning to see what the weather was going to be. It's going to be rain or cloud, they're not going to come. So we had a sellout the first crowd, and the people dressed up pretty nicely. Guys came with shirts and ties on, some hats on, and we'd been to a couple of races ourselves, and were amazed they came dressed like they hadn't been to a race before. But after the first one, they kind of dressed down after that.
They decided to call the race the Volunteer 500, and the first driver on the track for practice on July 27, 1961 was Tiny Lund in his Pontiac. Next was David Pearson.
The very first race, they had qualifying, they had practice during the week, and they had qualifying on Friday afternoon. And then they came back on Saturday, and they had a beauty pageant to crown the very first Miss Volunteer 500. And they had about 35 entrants. They had Miss America was here to help judge it. Then they had some VIPs from around the area, and I think some NASCAR VIPs to help judge the beauty pageant. And the photos from that event, the old concrete grandstand, the old A-side grandstand from Saturday night looks absolutely full for a beauty pageant.
And then on Sunday, the very first Volunteer 500 was held. Fred Lorenzen won the pole with a speed of 79.225 miles an hour. How good was the Volunteer 500 field July 30th, 1961? When the drivers took the green, 11 of the 42 in the lineup, more than 25%, would be on the list when NASCAR named its 50 greatest drivers in 1998. Country music star Brenda Lee, who was 17 at the time, sang the national anthem. When the Volunteer 500 was over, Jack Smith of Spartanburg, South Carolina, would forever be written in the history books as the first winner. However, Smith wasn't in the driver's seat of the Pontiac when the race ended. The burly driver made the first 290 laps, but then, with the extreme heat blistering his feet, turned over the duties to Johnny Allen of Atlanta to take over as a relief driver. It was a scene that would play out for years at Bristol until better insulation in the cars, power steering, and other things made the heat of the summer races easier to manage. Allen never gave up the lead, in fact finished 2 laps ahead of second-place finisher Fireball Roberts. Ned Jarrett, Richard Petty, and Buddy Baker completed the top 5 running order. The total purse for the race was $16,625, with the winner's share a whopping $3,225. Of the 42 cars that started, only 19 finished the brutal event. But after the drivers had packed up and the fans had gone home, Moore and Carrier had a lot of bills to pay, plus make the payments on that $600,000 loan. And 2 NASCAR races a year was not going to do it.
When Larry and Carl and R.G. Pope first built the track in 1961, part of their vision was that it would be a multi-use sports complex. That they would have all kinds of football games there, that they would have college games and NFL games, that they would have other types of events there to help pay the bills, because they'd borrowed $600,000 to build the darn thing, and they had to figure out a way to pay it off. And it wasn't going to be easy to pay off with 18,000 NASCAR tickets twice a year. So the idea was to have football. And the first game that they signed was the Washington Redskins, who were very popular in this part of the country, and the Philadelphia Eagles, who were the defending NFL champions.
We flew to Washington, met with George Preston Marshall on the Redskins. We'd like you to play an exhibition game inside our speedway, and you got one scheduled with Eagles, who were the national champions the year before. Call them up, and y'all come down to Bristol. And it worked. It worked. It's a football game and on the infield of the racetrack. Oh man, it's going to be a really big deal, coming down here. Teams came in, worked out the local high school, a lot of publicity.
On Labor Day weekend, they had the NFL exhibition game on a Saturday night of, as I said, of Labor Day weekend. And it didn't work out. They had I don't know. The newspaper accounts of the time said there were 5,000 or 6,000 people there. Carl says there's absolutely no way there was that many. Carl's explanation is nobody came. But it was a flop. It was a bust. These are teams that play before 20, 30, 40,000 people in their home cities. And as popular as football is in this part of the world, both at the high school and college level, I think they expected a big crowd.
Yeah, I had some television coverage, Redskin Network, but we had the goalpost up, and of course we cut them down that night. That was the end of that process. We tried football game, we tried rodeos, we tried country music festival, we tried everything. The only thing that really works is racing.
Then 3 years after the round track was built, they built the Bristol Dragway to supplement that income. And they even talked of a road course that would utilize the Dragway as a straightaway for the course.
The contract with Sports Car Club of America to build a road course in there.
The original intent was that the drag strip was going to be the long straightaway, and then you had that hairpin 90-degree corner at the end of it, and then what was the return road for the drag cars to come back to their pit area was going to be part of the road course as well. But they just never could make the logistics work. They actually had USAC sanctioning for that. They actually signed an agreement with USAC and had those folks ready to go with a sports car type race, but they just never could make it work.
Then in 1969, a change was made to the track that would make it the undisputed fastest half mile in the world.
The original configuration was about 22 degrees of banking, and the higher banking was in 1969. And there's a story behind that. When Larry first built the track, they wanted to be the best short track in the country. And they found out very quickly that speed sells tickets. And the fastest short track in the country was Asheville-Weaverville Speedway, which was just north of Asheville, North Carolina. It's a little half-mile track up in the mountains, and they were faster than Bristol. So a rivalry began between the two tracks. A lot of promotions, a lot of words tossed back and forth. And the national record for a half-mile track went back and forth between Bristol and Asheville for several years. And Asheville had it more times than Bristol did. And Larry really craved that. It became very important to him. So he looked at some tracks in the Midwest, in Dayton, Ohio, and Salem, Indiana, and looked at the higher banking that they had. He looked at the banking at Asheville. He brought in a couple of engineers, and they said, yes, you can go that steep, but we're not sure it's a good idea. And he took one look at it and said, this is roller derby with wheels. And so they raised the banking up to about 34, 35 degrees, 36 maybe at the very top. And that's when everything changed. The track record picked up by 13 miles an hour in the qualifying record just on the very first race. And from then on, Bristol was the king of speed.
But even then, with the small seating capacity, the men with the vision to build the track just couldn't make a go of it.
Of course, we kept it for 15 years and didn't make any money. It was so expensive to run the racetrack, to keep it up, and the purses, the drivers' money, just couldn't make any money. So after 15 years, I said, Larry, we can't keep going to the bank. We're just getting heavier in debt, so we need to really sell it. He said, I agree with you. So we sold a couple of guys from Nashville.
Lanny Hester and Gary Baker from Nashville got in, and they brought something very important with them. They raced at Nashville at the fairgrounds at night on Saturday with a Winston Cup race. And they figured, well, let's try to do something with this August race because we can't give the tickets away. Well, the night race was a huge success. After about a year or so, people recognized that this maybe was going to be the wave of the future. So Bristol set the standard there.
But the track would change hands again.
They kept it 3 or 4 years, and they sold it to a guy named Warner Hodgson. And then he went bankrupt. He bought 4 tracks at one time, and he went bankrupt. And then Larry's dad had died. Larry had a little money. He went to the bank and bought it back from the bank.
When Larry Carrier took the racetrack back, he saw the night race had been successful. He saw that NASCAR was starting to grow. There were a lot of product sponsors getting into NASCAR. There was a lot of money coming into NASCAR that wasn't there in the 1970s. You had a lot of commercial products off the store shelves that were sponsoring race cars and race teams. And so he jumped on that bandwagon very quickly and actually became a leader in terms of growth and development and expansion of the racetrack.
But in the mid-'80s, cable TV changed the way we watched sporting events, and Bristol was ready.
In the mid-1980s, Larry Carrier had an arrangement with ESPN, which was just getting started up in Bristol, Connecticut. And they were searching desperately for programming to do a 24-hour sports cable network. And Larry had an arrangement with ESPN that they were going to cover some of the IHRA drag races that Larry sanctioned, and also that they would cover the Winston Cup races at Bristol and the Grand National races at the Busch Series, or what is now the Nationwide Series. And so that went along for a year or so. They did the spring race. They did not do the night race because they said the lighting wasn't good enough. But they did a couple of races in the spring. And there was some conversations, and Larry worked really hard with the folks at ESPN and finally convinced them that they really needed to come do the night race. And so after a lot of negotiating and a lot of work, the first night race was broadcast in 1985, and it rained, and they were late getting started, and it had all the potential to be just this terrible disaster, because I mean there's nothing worse than rain programming from a sporting event, because people tune out automatically if nothing's going on. And here was this sporting event on a Saturday night prime time before the NFL season got started, and when they finally got going, Dale Earnhardt and Darrell Waltrip and Tim Richmond put on a whale of a show, and there were I don't know how many million people watching, maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million, because ESPN, as I said, wasn't that big at the time. But all of a sudden, the week after that race was on TV, the phone lines at the Speedway lit up with people wanting to get tickets for next year because they wanted to come to Bristol. They had seen what Bristol was all about.
In 1996, Larry Carrier sold the Speedway to Bruton Smith Speedway Motorsports for the bargain price of $26 million. In the following years, the capacity of the track would grow from 71,000 to the astonishing capacity of 160,000 seats. And while many other smaller tracks were taken off the NASCAR schedule, Bristol remains one of the most popular tracks in the sport.
The popularity of Bristol and the speed of Bristol is what separates it from the other short tracks that have fallen off the NASCAR schedule. Everyone who has owned Bristol Motor Speedway, from Larry and Carl, through Lanny Hester and Gary Baker, through Warner Hodgson, Larry again, and now Bruton Smith, every one of them has recognized that Bristol is different, Bristol is special. And they have played upon that and built upon that.
Well, you know, like I said, the track itself is so unique because you got that many people kind of in a fishbowl, and every seat's a good seat. There's not a bad seat there. You know, you can see the cars, the action. You can see the drivers' faces inside the cars, this kind of thing. You know.
Bristol is just. I go to a lot of tracks, but and Pocono is our home track. I don't never miss that one, but I never miss Bristol either. We come to this race every year. This is just the epitome of short track racing. I mean, this is where it's at. Anybody that comes to Bristol, or anybody asks me about racing, I say go to Bristol. It's just the greatest time, and it's a great place. Look at all the people here and the fun time we have. I go to so many different tracks where you see fights and people that are nasty and doing things. Yeah, in fact we talked about that on the way down, how nice everyone is. As you can see, we just met people around here last year. It was our first time in this site, and everybody remembers you and they talk to you, and it's just a great. It really is a friendly spot.
Just after the first race back in 1961, the drivers wanted to win at Bristol. This is not the track where you luck into a win. If you win here, you've earned it. And 50 years later, that still holds true.
If you look back at the history, the 50-year history of Bristol, the drivers who have had the greatest success here are the greatest drivers in the history of the sport. It is the highest skill level that gets you around Bristol. And you look at the guys who are in the NASCAR Hall of Fame in Charlotte, North Carolina. You look at the guys who have won the most Cup championships, and those are the guys who have won at Bristol.
Bristol Motor Speedway has put the city of Bristol into the vernacular of every race driver and race fan in the country.
I've been in politics a long time, in state senate for 16 years, and where I go, if from Bristol, well, how's the racetrack doing? Because you give me tickets. And then they don't know about Bristol except the racetrack. So it's done a lot to really promote Bristol in the whole entire Tri-City area, really.
So what about the next 50 years? Without a doubt, it will still be racing the way it ought to be.
They arrested me and they put me in jail and they called my pappy to throw my bail. And he said, son, you're gonna drive me to drinking if you don't stop driving that hot rod Lincoln.